Hello. I would like to review the novel The Singing Sand by Josephine Tey, her last book, written in 1952. Miss Tey died the following year. In this plot, she uses Scotland Yard Inspector Alan Grant as her hero. He appears in several of her novels. I would like to read a few pages near the beginning of the story, so you can get a sense of Inspector Grant's claustrophobia. Alan Grant, watching the lights of the yard float past beyond the steamed-up window and listening to the gentle sounds of the wheels clicking over the points, was glad because the end of the journey was the end of a night's suffering. Grant had spent the night trying not to open the door into the corridor. Wide awake, he had lain on his expensive pallet and sweated by the hour. He had sweated not because the compartment was too hot, the air conditioning worked to a marvel, but because, oh misery, oh shame, oh mortification, the compartment represented a small, enclosed space. To the normal eye, the compartment was just a neat little room with a bunk, a wash basin, a mirror, luggage racks in assorted sizes, shelves that appeared or disappeared as bidden, a fine little drawer for one's hypothetical valuables, and a hook for one's presumably unhawked watch. But to the initiate, the sad and haunted initiate, it was a small, enclosed space. Overwork, the doctor called it. Sit back and browse for a little, the doctor had said, crossing one elegant wimple leg over the other and admiring the hang of it. Grant could not imagine himself sitting back, and he considered browsing a loathsome word and a contemptible occupation. Browsing, the fattening up for the table, a mindless satisfaction of animal desires. Browse indeed. The very sound of the word was an offense, a snore. Have you any hobbies? The doctor had asked, his admiring glance going onto his shoes. No, Grant had said shortly. What do you do when you go on holiday? I fish. You fish, said the psychologist, seduced from his narcissistic gazing. And you don't consider that a hobby? Certainly not. What is it then, would you say? Something between a sport and a religion. And at that, Wample Street had smiled and had looked quite human, and assured him that his cure was only a matter of time and relaxation. Well, at least he had managed not to open the door last night, but the triumph had been dearly bought. He was drained and empty, a walking nothingness. Don't fight it, the doctor had said. If you want to be in the open, go into the open. But to have opened the door last night would have meant a defeat so mortal that he felt there would be no recovery. It would have been an unconditional surrender to the forces of unreason. So he had lain and sweated, and the door had stayed closed. But now, in the unrewarding dark of early morning, in the bleak, anonymous dark, he was as without virtue as if he had lost. I suppose this is how women feel after long labor, he thought, with that fundamental detachment which Wimple Street had noted and approved. But at least they have a brat to show for it. What have I got? His pride, he supposed, pride that he had not opened the door, that there was no reason to open. Oh, God! He opened the door now, reluctantly and appreciating the irony of that reluctance, loath to face the morning and life, wishing that he could throw himself back onto the rumpled couch and sleep, and sleep, and sleep. He picked up the 2 suitcases which the porter had not offered to do anything about, tucked the bundle of unread periodicals under his arm, and went out into the corridor. A little vestibule at the end of it was blocked almost to the roof with the luggage of the more lavish tippers, so that the door was nearly invisible, and Grant moved on into the second of the first-class coaches. The forward end of that, too, was stacked waist-deep with privileged obstacles, and he began to walk down the corridor toward the door at the rear end. As he did so, the porter himself came up from his cubbyhole at the far end to make sure that number B7 was aware that they were nearly at the terminus. It was the acknowledged right of number B7, or of any number whatever, to leave the train at his leisure upon arrival, but the porter had, of course, no intention of hanging around while someone had his sleep out. So he knocked loudly on the door of B7 and went in. As Grant came level with the open door, the porter was shaking B7, who was lying fully dressed on the bunk by the cloth of his sleeve, and saying in choked exasperation, "Come on, sir, come on, we're practically in." He looked up as Grant's shadow darkened the door and said disgustedly, "Tight as an owl." The compartment was so solid with the reek of whiskey that you could stand a walking stick in it, Grant noticed. Automatically, he picked up the newspaper the porter's shaking had dislodged on the compartment floor and straightened the man's jacket. "Can't you recognize a dead man when you see one?" he said. Through the haze of his tiredness, he heard his own voice say it. "Can't you recognize a dead man when you see one?" As if it were a thing of no moment. "Can't you recognize a Primrose when you see one? Can't you recognize a Rubens when you see one? Can't you recognize the Albert Memorial when—" "Dead," said the porter in a kind of howl. "He can't be. I'm due to go off." The novel starts in the highlands of Scotland and ends in the deserts of Arabia. And along the way, we see the workings of the great inspector's mind. There may be a murder to solve. You will just have to wait and see. Read and enjoy.